We're going to dive into the anatomy of the basic drill cycle, which is G81. We're going to talk a little bit about what is happening in each stage. So let's have a look here. So the first thing that we're going to look at is a good, I'll say, example or a good reference to be looking at this is cnccookbook.com. I'm not advertising for them, but I felt that this was a very good setup of information. And of course, we're going to do some of this work ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about this. We don't have any of the safety lines in here. We're not calling up the tool or anything with this basic setup. But there's a few things that we will talk about, again, just as part of the drill cycle. So you don't see G81 until here. The first thing we notice is there's going to be an initial Z movement, and in this case, it's 1 inch. And so we're going to do the example with 1 inch too, so it makes a little bit more sense. And then we're going to have a show up to a particular set of coordinates, okay, and that's going to be the first hole. And then we're going to call out, and of course, as long as we're in a position, that's the most important thing, when we call out the G81 cycle. So the G81 cycle, we have a G99 here. We're going to have to figure out what that is. We already know we're talking about the drill cycle, the simple one for G81. And now we have an R value here, okay, and that's going to be a return or rapid to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have a Z value, okay. And then, of course, this right here, since G81 was called, is going to prevail on the next set of coordinates here. So it's going to do the same cycle at this location and this location until G80 happens, which cancels any of those canned cycles. So let's take a peek at this. I want to scroll up. There's a diagram here that's kind of showing what's going on. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But immediately you're going to see here to where you see a G98, and then of course you see a G99. Now up here we saw the G99. Okay, so what is the difference between 98 and 99? Well, that's kind of important to making sure that you know where the drill bit actually rapids up to. So let's talk a little bit about that. The first thing is that there's an initial Z height, and scrolling back up, we see that's 1 inch. And then we have an R value or a rapid to value, and that is buried after the G81 into the R value. So R is 0.2, but the initial Z is 1. The initial Z is up here. This is 1 at this height, and then the R value, okay, is down here. All right, a little different. So depending on which one we call out is where it's going to retract to. So again, bear with me. We'll get to taking a look at what that exactly means. All right. So I'm going to open up this down here, and I just want to show you a little bit about what the G98 and G99. G98 here, we're looking at the mill. Okay, it's return to initial Z level in can cycle. Okay, so initial Z, where did we first start from? And going past the G98 for turning, go to G99 for mill, return to R level in can cycle. Okay, we'll talk about that. Now, R, looking at our characters here, defines the size of our arc or radius. Well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Or, okay, defines retract height in milling can cycles. Okay, so now we're on to something. Okay, so what we're going to do is pop up the NC viewer at this point, and we're going to take a look at this. So I wrote this code here. You got your G90, G54, G17, G20, kind of sets everything up right. We have absolute first fixture offset. We have XY plane and G20, which is going to be in inches. G40, I like to just cancel any of those cutter offsets that may be left residual in the controller. And then, of course, we're calling up our tool right here. See, T1M6. We're going to fire it up to a pretty fast RPM, no big deal. And then we're actually going to go to position. And in this case, we're going to wrap it over to Y1X1, or X1Y1, pardon me. And then we're going to wrap it down to Z 1 inch. And now you're going to see here the G99, G81. So we talked about the difference between G98 and G99. You're going to get to see it. And we have G81, that's our drill cycle. And then here's our R value at 2, and then we have Z at negative 0.71. And look what I forgot already. We're going to go ahead and type this in. I need an F value for feed rate. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and type that in. We're going to pretend it's going to be 10 for the sake of this exercise. And then this here, this canned cycle, is going to happen at each one of these other locations until it's canceled. Then we go home and end the program. So let's take a look at the plot on that. So it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see here to where I wrap it down and then I move into some locations. And looking at it, it doesn't look like I have a whole lot of Z movement, so that's a little concerning. Now, we talked a little bit about this in other class, and it's kind of not giving us a warm and fuzzy that we're not going to break a drill bit off in a hole. So is it a problem with the backplotting, or is it a problem with the actual code? So let's go ahead and try something else and take a look at that. So I'm going to move over here to a different screen, okay, where we have the same code, and I'm going to go ahead and add that F10 in there so that we have something to go with. So this is the exact same code. Setting it up, we have the Z1, the G99, and so on. So let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to backplot, and we're going to see what it looks like. So I'm going to select here and come up and take a look at what this means. So let's rewind and start. I'm going to get through the first little bit of code here, and now we're going to go to position. Now, if you notice where it's sitting at right now, it's highlighting step 6, which is Z1. So what it's done is it's created this blue line for the plane, the Z plane, at 1 inch above the part. Okay. Now you can see two different things. One, you can see this line going down, the green spot, that's where the tool is at the moment, because it's already gone through and done the drilling, so now it's retracted here. Well, wait a second here. It's not up here at that 1 inch. And the reason being is because we called G99 and then we gave an R value. So let's back up and look at that again. So the G99 is, for the milling, return to R level in can cycle. And remember that the R level is retract height in milling can cycles. Okay, so the R level in this case, pardon me, let me get back to the correct screen. The R level is 0.2, where the initial Z was actually 1. Okay, so notice it's not going back up to the initial level, but rather to 200 thousandths above the part. So as we move forward, you'll notice that it rapids over, does its drill cycle, rapids over, does its drill cycle, and each time it's actually going to the retract height that is displayed as the 0.2. Okay. Now let's go ahead and play with this a little bit more. I'm going to close this viewer out. I happened to hit the wrong thing, so pardon me. Let me get over here, and now we're back to this. Now we're going to take this and go to G98. Okay. G98, we're going to save this, and then we're going to go ahead and backplot. So when we backplot this time, you should notice an immediate difference. Look at that. Wait a minute here. There's not a lower line. All right, so let's walk through it and see what it looks like. So here we have it rapiding down, and remember what we talked about before, the 1 inch right here, this blue line represents that rapid 2 point, or that rapid 2 plane. And then we're going to step through and we're going to go down. Wait a second here, it doesn't look like there's an additional height. This green is representing on the blue line, which is our original retract height. Or not our original retract height, but our original Z height. So when we go over here and look at this, remember G98 for the mill is returned to initial Z level in can cycle. So this is good, right? So we're able to go down and come back out not at a R value, but actually at the initial Z height. Now, why would we want to do something like this? Well, quite frankly, if you have some clamps on top of your workpiece, you may want that additional safety, so you can make it come up a little bit higher, or at that rapid 2 to get around some obstacles. So it is definitely helpful, but it's very important to know remember which one you're actually calling out. Okay. So again, that's some good stuff there. I wanted to go back and talk about a few other things, and along with that, the one that I wanted to talk about is the fact that the depth. Okay, so we're going to feed down to the Z depth. So we're going to say that the Z, okay, specifies in this case the depth, but not a coordinate. Okay, so going back, try to clarify here. When we go back to this, let me get rid of this screen, and we're back here. This Z here, the negative 0.71, is actually from the original height, okay, or the R value above the part. It's going to do a value of 0.71 down, okay. So the depth that is measured from R, so that's very important to remember. So again, going back to this, the R value here, okay, in this case isn't doing anything for our retract because this is going back to the original Z position. However, from 200 thousandths above the part, the Z will actually go down 0.71. So I'm going to assume here that in this case the part is about a ½ inch thick, because again it's got to go 0.5, okay, with an additional 0.2. So again, it's from this R value, whatever it ends up being, okay, the Z value is how far down from that point it's actually going to go. So if the R was 0, then this would actually go down to negative 0.71. But because this is 0.2, the actual coordinate will end up being negative 0.51, because again, you're taking 2/10 off of that. It says this is where it's actually starting, the plane it's starting in. So it's very, very important to remember when you're doing your programs. Okay. So again, it goes on to talk about this with an R of 2, then depth of 0.7, we're going down negative ½ inch. So again, make sure you do the math correctly so you get that. All right. So as a last reminder, G98 and G99, they are two different things, and depending on how you do your programming and your initial Z height and also your R value is going to determine how those things act and function, and it is also going to have an effect on your actual drilling depth.